Hi everyone, this is Jason Barrack of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. He is a technologist and serial entrepreneur who has become one of the most well-known and well-respected figures in the Bitcoin space. He's the author of 2 books. The first one is Mastering Bitcoin, considered the best technical guide to Bitcoin, and the second is The Internet of Money, a book about why Bitcoin matters. He's a Bitcoin entrepreneur that has founded a number of Bitcoin businesses and launched several community open source projects, and he's a permanent host on the popular Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast. Andreas, Antonopoulos, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Jason.
Great, and I'm excited to talk to you. I've been following your work for a long time. I wish I bought Bitcoin in 2010-11 when I originally found your work.
Yes, well, I wasn't around in 2010-11. I wish I had bought Bitcoin then, but I tried to focus on the technology, not as much as the price.
I actually want to ask you if you would still classify Bitcoin as an experiment.
Yes, I would probably still classify it as an experiment. It's an experiment that has shown incredible resiliency and great results. But nevertheless, considering the broader system that it's competing with, the economic system, the established economic system, an 8-year software infrastructure and network is still in its infancy. We've got a long way to go. So far, going well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And, it's done a lot of the blockchain mining. There hasn't been, huge bugs and huge hacks necessarily like what's happened with Ethereum last year with the hard fork and the attack on the DAO token. But, you brought up about the other things that people want to see out of Bitcoin. And I think, this is going to be the challenges going forward, whether Bitcoin can compete with credit card processing, because it has a long way to go in that regard.
Well, I don't think credit card processing is where we necessarily need to compete. We live in a world of 7.5 billion people, of whom 2.5 billion have absolutely no access to banking whatsoever. And a good 4.5 billion people have very limited access to banking. So very few people actually have functional banking, credit cards, stable currencies, sane governments, and all of the things that we enjoy in the developed world. I think Bitcoin offers a lot of opportunity to fully democratize and bring economic inclusion to billions of people who have never had any of these things.
Yes, and it also, saves money over Western Union MoneyGram. So that's why, Bitcoin has grown in popularity so quickly, there's market efficiency there, and it's providing value to people. I think it's cut costs for some people, enormously.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think then that some people are being too ambitious or totally unrealistic then if they think that Bitcoin, they want to, scale Bitcoin up in terms of being able to process mine blocks faster to start competing with credit cards then?
Well, I think there's a whole different question about whether Bitcoin can achieve the scale necessary to compete with credit cards. And I think that's a bit like asking in the early 90s if the internet can achieve the scale to transmit all of the world's faxes from fax machines. And that's completely missing the picture, because not only will the blockchain technology scale to achieve credit card level volumes, but if it does, it will do so under a completely different technical infrastructure, which will then allow it to scale 10, 100, 1,000 times greater, so that we can one day do microtransactions, true microtransactions at insane levels. And so, yes, I think not only can we see this technology evolve to compete with all payment technologies and scale very much, but also exceed them. And the thing is, you got to realize the growth and scalability of a technology like this is on a completely different curve. Visa has grown, but it hasn't grown exponentially. It's grown linearly for many, many years. This technology is on an exponential curve in innovation and adoption in many other respects. If it grows exponentially, that means that the moment it reaches parity with Visa, it's about a year away from doing 2 times Visa capacity and 5 years away from doing 100 times Visa capacity, because it's on a completely different schedule.
Those are great points. I was actually at a DC blockchain technology summit, and there was government people from governments all over the world, federal government in DC. There was a lot of corporate people there, and they didn't care about the Bitcoin price. They just cared that, there was an IBM vice president there, and he said he was getting paid to build blockchains, build databases for large corporations 17 hours a day, and he seemed excited about it. So I think there is a rapid adoption of blockchain technology and the distributed database technology by large corporations now.
Yes, but most of them are missing the point. And the real point of these technologies is the fact that they enable an open, global, decentralized system that offers innovation to anyone, that is neutral towards the sources and destinations of payments, that has open access, open innovation, is permissionless, and is borderless and global. Those are the benefits of this system. As a database, it's a fairly slow system, but as an open platform that anyone can build on without the restrictions of traditional financial systems, that's where the magic comes. Just like, the internet was not just a faster fax machine or better fax machine. What it did is it allowed people to build application without asking anybody's permission, and in some cases stepping on toes. We're doing this interview over Skype. Do you remember what a controversy Skype was when it first came out? The phone companies absolutely hated it. It destroyed the long-distance business, as it deserved to do. And, that's really the potential for Bitcoin, creating an open platform to build financial applications that anyone in the world can access without identity, without vetting, without pre-authorization by centralized banks and governments. That's the really exciting thing. What these large corporations are mostly doing is trying to reinvent the traditional business model that has them as controlling intermediaries, when in fact what this technology does is it removes intermediaries, just like the internet.
Those are great points. Yeah, WhatsApp is also, in addition to Skype, WhatsApp has also become very popular for free long-distance calls. What these large corporations want to do, the normal business model is they want to patent something. They need something to say to shareholders to justify high stock valuations, that, we have all these patents, we're going to privatize it. So they want private blockchains and IP and stuff. And what you talked about Bitcoin and blockchain is a lot of it is open source and available for anyone.
Yep, one is a 19th century model and the other one's a 21st century model, and they're now competing head to head, and they can't hide behind regulators. They can't hide behind traditional forces that they use to stop competition. Finance is facing competition from the internet for the first time since the beginning of the internet, and the finance sector is about to realize what happens when the internet comes to eat your lunch.
I want to ask you about comments you made in March of 2017. You said 95% of developments are in Bitcoin Core. So does that mean then you think that there's not going to be a lot of developers on the new Bitcoin after it forked, the Bitcoin Cash?
Well, I think the development pattern has continued. There's really only one active developer on Bitcoin Cash. Still today, 95% of the development continues to be on Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Cash really spun off an alternative blockchain. I mean, we already have more than 1,000 of those. Now we have one more. They share the name Bitcoin. But other than that, really, I don't see it as that exciting.
I want to transition now and ask you about altcoins. Do you think any of the altcoins like Ethereum or Ripple have a chance at developing a competing network effect to Bitcoin?
Well, I think many of the other open blockchains, and I'm really interested in the open decentralized blockchains, I draw some pretty strong distinctions between Ethereum and Ripple. One is decentralized, the other one really isn't. But I think many of the open blockchains out there have the ability to generate significant network effect, but I don't see them as competing directly against Bitcoin because they serve different purposes, and more importantly, they've specialized in order to achieve different goals. Just like Bitcoin has certain characteristics that make it suitable for some applications and totally unsuited for other applications. It's a bit like comparing a tractor to a Formula One car. Not only can you not build a hybrid, but neither of those can compete in the other's domain, right? And so I don't really see these as competitive. I think we're going to see an explosion of evolution and competition in this space as we explore all of the different niches that are available for different applications, different monetary policy, different velocities, different levels of ease of use versus security and privacy, anonymity, fungibility, value, all of these things. So, money, if you think about it as consisting of store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account characteristics, is now being engineered programmatically, and all of these systems are tweaking various parameters to find the best mix for different applications. That doesn't mean that they compete directly.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time. I think it's, kind of the Wild West. There's a lot of free market forces here. I'm a libertarian Austrian school economics guy. I don't like, central banks and Wall Street, getting their hands as middlemen in so many things, whether it's the IPO market or others, and how corrupt and inefficient some of those systems are. But yet I'm also worried that, there's about 850 altcoins now, and there's over 5,300 initial coin offerings. I'm worried that, the average person, the retail person who doesn't have the technology background that you do, the coding background that you do, is going to get, they're not going to do their research, and they're, going to see a hot press release or something, and there's going to be fraud, and they're going to risk losing all their money, trying to speculate in the initial coin offering market.
Yeah, absolutely. They will, and that will happen. Of course, the solution to that is not to introduce hierarchical oversight in the form of a bureaucratic Securities and Exchange Commission trying to impose its will on an entire planet. I think what we need to do is start thinking about novel ways of using programmable money to generate more consumer security, and not trying to shoehorn this into the old way of doing things, which is really what this is trying to move away from. But you're right, there will be, first of all, there's a lot of scams. Once it became evident that Bitcoin wasn't going anywhere, and people saw that it kept bringing, quite successful outcomes to those who were involved, the sharks started circling. People are attracted purely by greed, with no interest in the principles or the technology, just to make a quick buck. And there are a lot of scams out there, and investors should be really, really careful. This is not a space to go, dancing in and start playing the various alt chains and day trading and things like that. I think that investors are in trouble if they go day trading penny stocks just as much, and this market behaves even more with even more volatility than a penny stock market. So yes, people have to be very careful. Listen, if you don't understand the technology, you have no business trying to invest in it and day trade in it. I think the market is way too immature for most investors to be involved.
I agree. And the United States is so litigious nowadays that there's a lot of people who their other investments are not doing so well. So because Bitcoin has been going up and Ethereum has been going up, they've been moving a lot more of their capital, probably a lot more than they should, into these things because, they're chasing momentum. This is turning in. There's people who don't know anything about the technology, who just see the chart and are buying it because it's going up. But I think, I don't know if any of these initial coin offerings, Andreas, have gone to zero yet. I don't think any of them have, but once one or two do, and someone loses, $500,000 or $1 million or more of their money, what's going to happen. They're going to start complaining, and they're going to go to the bureaucrats. They're going to hire lawyers. So, I would prefer there wouldn't be a bunch of new regulation on this, but that's unfortunately the system we live in now, where when people lose that kind of money, they are going to start complaining and hiring lawyers and going to the bureaucrats and demanding,
right,
they do something.
Yeah, and what they'll do is they'll try to apply out-of-date regulations based on their understanding of this technology 3 years ago. Then it will take a couple of years for those regulations to go into effect, at which point they'll be completely obsolete and out of date. Meanwhile, other countries that are taking less of a knee-jerk approach will continue to extend their lead over the United States, which is very, very quickly becoming a backwater of innovation in these technologies because of the regulatory mess that exists today, because of the knee-jerk reaction to any kind of innovative technology that bucks the norm, especially because the regulators are so thoroughly captured by Wall Street and are serving the interests of the banks and not consumers. The U.S. is really becoming a stagnant place for doing these things. And you're seeing a lot of these companies, a lot of the innovation and the jobs, the growth are moving outside the U.S. That's one of the problems with living in a declining empire.
Completely agree with that. With the initial coin offering, I'm actually getting emails from Silicon Valley and New York City PR agencies tied to, some of these initial coin offerings. They're offering tokens, and I can't understand why this, it seems like a regular startup, why they're even selling tokens at all. So do you think then that a lot of money in the past that would have had to go through the angel investor venture capital route, enormous amount of it's, going into tokens now and ICOs because it's just there's no regulation and it's quick money?
Yes, absolutely, but not because there's no regulation. Angel investment is very, very unregulated too, as is most of the VC space. There's not much regulation in those. You can go with a startup and ask for money from a lot of people around the world, and as long as they're accredited investors, nobody's going to bother you. It's not a matter of regulation. What it is the fact that this allows a startup to tap a very large market that includes a global market with global reach, tap a volume of liquidity that isn't easy to find for any startup. We're talking about $100 billion market right now. And within that volume of liquidity, not only create a token that acts as an access token, it can act almost like equity, it can pay dividends, it can be a voting stock, but also can be used to access products or services or rewards in the form of a Kickstarter type thing. It's a very versatile system of tokens, and then can be traded immediately on a secondary market that's highly liquid. There's a reason this is happening, and the reason it's happening is that this technology is better than traditional VCs. It's better than Kickstarter. It's better than traditional stock markets. The regulation is really not the reason, or the lack of regulation is not the reason that this is happening.
That's interesting that you said the technology is better. I think you're the first person I've talked to that said that. There's a lot of people have said there's a lot of problems with it. I think it's probably mostly Wall Street and Silicon Valley people who are making money off the status quo. I know Patrick Byrne. He's funded.
Sour grapes, indeed, my friend. Sour grapes. There's a lot of that. VCs who are pumping money into this thinking that it was going to disrupt banking, and turns out the first industry that gets disrupted is VC itself. That's kind of ironic, isn't it?
That's ironic, yes.
Well, that's real disruption. You can't plan where it's going to hit.
Well, Mark, that's why I think Marc Andreessen likes it, right? Because he said he wants software to eat the world, and I'm not sure if he knows all the innovations, and he's one of the main technology guys who has been backing Bitcoin for the last couple of years. But yeah, I think a lot of the guys on Wall Street and Silicon Valley are afraid of, because they were making so much money off the status quo. But you have guys like Patrick Byrne who are funding. I think they want a blockchain exchange where a lot of stocks and assets are tokenized, and I think Reggie Middleton is working on a competing one called Veritasium. I'm trying to have him on as well.
Yeah, there's dozens and dozens of those popping out. And of course, you've got to realize that this, you talked about a bunch of companies in the US, and you talked about Wall Street and Silicon Valley. But, that's the thing that most people are missing. And it's really hard to break out of that sphere. We keep thinking of finance as a game that's played on a national level. We talk about US companies. This is not about the US. This is a global phenomenon. We're competing with Chinese startups that are doing ICOs. We're competing with capital coming in from all around the world. This is a purely global market that has never existed before. Never before has it been possible for a startup with a few smart people, some prototype code, to raise money from an international audience and to then deliver product and equity to an international audience, crossing all boundaries, all jurisdictions, all local regulations. That's what's exciting about this.
Yeah, and the Japanese are known technophiles over there with how advanced technologically their society is. And I think they just recently, in the last 2 months, they lowered all their taxes for investments for Bitcoin. So that's going to move a lot of Japanese capital then into the space as well.
Yeah.
Well over $1 billion has been invested in blockchain infrastructure. What types of businesses is the dollar going into in terms of the blockchain infrastructure? And how do you see this this changing or disrupting different old legacy industries?
Well, the killer application for blockchain is, of course, currency. It's the thing that most needs to be fungible and free and liquid and be able to move across borders quickly. It's the area where you have the greatest restrictions and one of the areas that technology has touched so little. So I expect blockchain is obviously going to affect the core financial services industry. But then it expands to things like insurance, and now we're seeing it in the entrepreneurial sectors of venture capital. Investment. I think remittances and cross-border payments, import and export businesses involved in international trade are next. And then, of course, it's impacting central banking, monetary policy, and the behavior of people when it comes to capital flight and capital controls around the world. This is having a ripple effect, and the ripple started small, but they're getting pretty big, and they're reverberating around the world. They're now affecting central bank policy around the world. They're making decisions at a national level differently because of the existence of cryptocurrencies and the fact that gives the population of a country additional choices they didn't have before. You can no longer take a whole country hostage in some kind of hyperinflation race to the bottom if a significant portion of that population can simply opt out and move their assets away from the bank. Right? You can't do negative interest rates in bank accounts if a population can move their money out. You can't put the squeeze on credit cards or cash if things like Bitcoin exist. So it's changing the game all around the world, and it's going to have an immediate impact on a broad variety of industries as well as a geopolitical impact.
I am also, you mentioned some great points there. I am also somewhat worried, though, that governments now, they can copy and paste, essentially. They can take this blockchain technology and start going for cashless society. So, they can impose taxes for people buying Bitcoin, then you become criminal just because you own some Bitcoin now. Or
right.
I think there was Republican congressman recently who wanted every time you leave the country, you have to, at the customs, you have to declare how much Bitcoin you own. It's the proposals are getting ridiculous. I think I heard that the government of Canada is already testing a government-backed blockchain cashless society, and India wants to adopt it in the near future as well in the next couple of years.
Yeah, they can copy the technology, but what they can't copy is the most important principles and capabilities of this. The whole point of open public blockchains is that they are open and censorship resistant and borderless and global, and anyone can access them at any time. And they're also voluntary. You take away all of those things, and what you're left with is a digital cage. And they'll try to put people in digital cages for sure. When it comes to currency, the currency wars are definitely escalating around the world, but people have more and more choices. When it comes to choosing family and breaking a currency law, most people will break a currency law. We've seen that happen in Venezuela, where it's highly illegal to use Bitcoin, and yet it's the only way some people can feed their families. So what are they doing? They're breaking the law and using Bitcoin. We're seeing that in India when demonetization happened. We saw that in a number of other countries, and this will continue to happen. Of course, you've got to remember that politicians are corrupt as well, so they're going to start stashing away their fortune in Bitcoin at the same time that they ban it for the rest of the population. There's a double-ended game going on there. Things are going to get exciting, but in the end, once a technology like this is out of the bag, there's no going back. You can't uninvent this technology. You can't pretend that the mathematics behind Bitcoin are no longer valid. And banning it involves basically turning off all systems of communication, including the internet. That's not going to happen. So you can get around any blocks. People will get around. If they make it illegal, then people will move to other countries or they'll use it illegally.
I completely agree. Yeah, people, if they have a lot of wealth in Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden the government's change ex post facto to like a 90% capital gains tax on Bitcoin and extra one or something like that. I mean, people are going to say, I may leave the country. It's not like they can, you have to submit all of your, let's see here, a thumb drive. Like you have to give the customs agent a thumb drive at the border there so he can scan your Bitcoin accounts.
Well, but it doesn't matter. I mean, you keep in mind, this is a pure mathematical system. I can store my Bitcoin based on a sequence of keys, generated from 12 English words. If I can memorize 12 English words, I can carry my entire fortune in my head. There is no physical thumb drive device or anything else. It's not even written down somewhere. It's just 12 words that I've memorized. So unless you're willing to go to, subjecting people to torture in order to extract their Bitcoin keys, which is ridiculous. Now, listen, the more likely thing to happen is that we're going to see a big shuffle here. Just like with the era of the internet, some governments became very hostile to the internet. You know what we call those governments? Dictatorships. The places that hate the internet hate human freedom, hate freedom of association, hate all of the principles of the Enlightenment. They hate democracy, and that's why they hate the internet. And you see the same thing with this. Bitcoin is about people having freedom and autonomy and self-expression with their finances and the ability to control their own money. And governments that hate that, well, you should really ask, is this really about Bitcoin, or do I have a lousy government? What does this tell me about the form of government that I have? And people are going to start seeing these distinctions.
Unfortunately, I think most governments, want more taxes. So they're looking for new ways to where they can tax the people, whether it's in the European Union talking about freezing people's accounts if there's another bank failure, or trying to go after people's the underground economy in Europe. I think is over 40% of their economy that's cash based. That doesn't go into the banking system. So the government, that's what worries me. I think in the United States, there's this the illusion the United States is full free market and full pro capitalism. There's so much. well, I mean, like hasn't the IRS has already gone after Coinbase, right? So they can't shut down Bitcoin, but they can start targeting some of the exchanges and to hand over like account numbers and tax information and things.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can see a lot of efforts like that, but all they're going to do is they're going to push this technology underground, and they're going to push it overseas, and other countries are going to make better choices and develop more innovation and growth and more jobs in this space. So it really depends on how you land politically and whether you believe people should be free to use money, and whether you should be able to pay another person instead of having to use a corporation as an intermediary for every payment you do, and every payment being subjected to full surveillance by dozens of governments around the world. That's not a kind of power that I think governments should have. But, that's a political decision for every person to make on their own. I think we've had free anonymous instantaneous transactions for 15,000 years in the form of cash. And this idea of fully surveillance finance is fairly new, and I don't think it should last very long.
I think, unfortunately, Andreas, that money has become very political because governments have hijacked it since, there was an elimination of gold and silver standard, because the governments are always trying to figure out either new taxes or how they can, force legal tender laws on people. But my last question for you before I let you go, are there any altcoins you like? Are you doing actually any speculation in the space, or do you think most people should avoid speculation entirely?
Well, I think speculation is really an individual choice, which has to do with your level of comfort and knowledge. Certainly, it's risky. I don't like the term altcoin simply because there are many open blockchains, and some people use it as a derogatory term. There are many interesting open blockchains, and if I'm using one of those and I use the technology and I'm interested in the technology, I also invest a tiny bit into the various tokens just so I can use the technology. Or take a position in the market. I'm currently writing my next book, which is Mastering Ethereum, which I'm writing with co-founder of Ethereum, Gav Wood. That's due out in the first quarter of 2018. So I'm certainly interested in Ethereum. I think it's a fascinating technology. And I've also dabbled with a bunch of other open blockchains that I find of interest, especially the ones that are exploring issues of privacy, such as Zcash and Monero, or Dash, which is looking into governance, or Decred and things like that. I look at all kinds of different things. I wouldn't recommend investing in things unless you are interested in the technology and understand how it works.
That is definitely great insights. There's a lot of people, though, I think we discussed this earlier, that, don't understand the key technical aspects of each coin, but, they look at the chart and it's going up and they've been moving money out of other asset classes and they're putting in. And I've been trying to warn people, but, these markets are doing so well in terms of them going up. And, nothing has really crashed yet and kept going down. Everything's pretty much, bounced back quickly. Look how Bitcoin got cut in half and then it bounced back so quickly. So people are kind of, it's definitely a bull market right now.
Yeah, for now, I expect it to reverse, and I expect to see some retrenchments. But, I've been through 10 rounds of that already since 2012. So I'm looking at this with a much more long-term perspective. If Bitcoin was down to $1,000 tomorrow, or even $500 tomorrow, I wouldn't blink. I'd just continue doing my work, focusing on developing the infrastructure, the technology, educating people. This technology is going to roll out over decades. It's going to have a deep, meaningful, and lasting impact in the world, both across many industries as well as across the geopolitics of this world. It's going to rewrite the basis of many of the institutions we use, which are 19th century industrialized society institutions that have no room in an information economy and don't scale for an information economy. So this is about changing the future in a very radical way and a drastic way, because it is a fascinating and effective technology. If the price tomorrow is half what it is today, I really don't give a damn.
I actually would. If it dropped to 500, I would probably start buying more because I'm a contrarian. And sentiment, I actually like buying when other people are selling, so but I'm different like that.
That's sometimes a good approach, yeah.
Well, I enjoyed our discussion today, Andreas. If our listeners want to follow more of your work, please tell them how to do so with your podcast and where they can find your articles and your books.
I think most people enjoy which are on YouTube. I have a video channel that posts YouTube every 2 days continuously with a lot of great content, and there's more than 250 hours of informational educational videos. I'm not trying to push or pump or sell any of these coins. I'm describing, explaining the technology and my vision of how it's going to affect the world. And then I have 2 books published. The Internet of Money is for a general audience. It's not for technical people. It's for everybody, and it explains why these technologies matter. And some of my ideas on how the future might change because of them. It's a quite easy read. It's out in audiobook, print, and an ebook from Amazon. You can find it everywhere. And then Mastering Bitcoin, if you're a software engineer, that's the book to understand how this technology works, nitty-gritty details, but not for a general audience.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to continuing this discussion as Bitcoin, the blockchain, and the other amazing innovations and financial market. It's been a very exciting roller coaster, to say the least. I think it's been probably the most exciting market the last couple years Bitcoin has, and the other cryptocurrencies. So I look forward to discussing that more with you in the future.
Absolutely, Jason. It would be my pleasure.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.